What is the strangest unsolved mystery? There are so many viral ones, but my unsolved mystery regards my uncle's brother, Ed. About 15 miles away from me, my family from Philadelphia owns a hunting cabin. While out hunting at the top of this mountain, Ed stumbled across an unmarked trail. Of course he followed it. It led to a random high electric fence in the area. On one trip out he took my grandma. They found a hatch in the ground outside the fence, pried it open and climbed down. Inside was another hatch and gear for diving. Grandma and Ed took pictures and climbed out. Somehow they discovered the electricity was down and climbed a tree and hopped the fence. Found empty boxes, took a bunch of pics, and left. Ed called around trying to find out what this place was, got a lot of different answers. At the same time my grandma was visiting family at the Air Force Base in Vegas. She was with a high-ranking officer and showed him the pictures. His response was, "That's above my clearance grade, don't ask questions." She asked more questions to others and learned the boxes housed nuclear war materials. Soon after returning to PA, those pictures disappeared. Then one night Ed is in Philly, gets a call, and leaves his family in a hurry for their safety, he claimed. He drove 4 hours to the cabin in the middle of the night. My grandma gets a call from his wife to check on him because she's worried. She finds him dead in the cabin with a trunk full of guns. But he didn't shoot himself. First people to arrive on scene are men in black suits, then EMS. Death certificate lists inconclusive. So, what is on that mountain and who killed my uncle's brother? It's been over 20 years. I doubt there will ever be an answer. 2. The story of Aurang Medan always gives me chills for some reason. At some point of time in or around June 1947, 2 American vessels navigating the Straits of Malacca, the city of Baltimore, and the Silver Star, among others passing by, picked up several distress messages from the nearby Dutch merchant ship Aurang Medan. A radio operator aboard the troubled vessel sent the following message in Morse code: SOS from Aurang Medan *****, we float. All officers including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead *****. A few confused dots and dashes of Morse code. Later, 2 words came through clearly. They were "I die." Then, after that chilling message, there was nothing more heard of. When the Silver Star crew eventually located and boarded the apparently undamaged Aurang Medan in an attempt at a rescue, the ship was found littered with corpses, including the carcass of a dog, everywhere, with the dead bodies found sprawled on their backs, the frozen, and allegedly badly frightened, faces of the deceased upturned to the sun above with mouths gaping open and eyes staring straight ahead, with the corpses resembling horrible caricatures. No survivors were located and no visible signs of injuries on the dead bodies were observed. Just as the ship was to be prepared for a tow by the Silver Star to a nearby port, a fire then suddenly broke out in the ship's number 4 cargo hold, forcing the boarding party to hastily evacuate the doomed Dutch freighter, thus preventing any further investigations to be carried out. Soon after, the Aurang Medan was witnessed exploding before finally sinking. 3. The Sodder children disappearance still haunts me. Christmas Eve/Day, 1945. West Virginia. The residents of the Sodder house, consisting of 11 people, went to bed. Mom, Dad. 9 out of 10 kids. At 12:30 a.m., Mom is awoken by the phone ringing. She answers it and hears a man's voice along with glasses clinking together. She goes back to bed. At about 1:30 a.m., Mom awoken to the smell of smoke. The house is on fire. Mom, Dad, and 4 of the children escaped. One of the older kids runs to go get the fire department. When called at a neighbor's house, they don't respond. That neighbor goes to look for the fire chief. While this is happening, Mom and Dad try to rescue the remaining kids. However, each attempt was thwarted. The ladder they had was missing, trucks wouldn't start, etc. Help didn't arrive until 8 a.m. despite the fire department only being 2 miles away. An investigation revealed that faulty electrical wiring was the cause, despite having no problems before. Hell, they had it checked by the power company earlier that who deemed it safe. When digging through the rubble of the house, the remains of the children unaccounted for just weren't there. For bones and such to melt, they would have to be subjected to 2000 F heat for 2 hours. The house burned down in 45 minutes. So, the question remains. Where did the soldered children go? 4. I live in a small town in Italy. I'm working at restaurant as a waiter during the summer. The owner is 75 years old and is doing nothing but working all day every day. He has like 6 or 7 brothers and his family comes from a basic farm. All of the brothers own a restaurant, hotel, or both. There are several stories that make the family seem really fishy. Now the question many people are asking themselves around here is how these poor brothers managed to acquire enough money to buy/build all of these restaurants/hotels. They come from a small farm like most of the people living here. In the 70s all of the brothers went to work on a ship for like 2 years. They came back and all of them were wealthy enough to buy the aforementioned places. They couldn't earn that much money to build something as big. So how did they get it, nonetheless? Before I go into what I believe happened, me going to tell you about some strange happenings involving the family over the years. Like 15 years ago one of the hotels was getting modern furniture, so they threw the old stuff out. When a crane picked up a big couch, the couch broke apart and money was flying through the air. It was lire, which was the old currency before the euro and wasn't being used for a couple of years at the time. This hotel was the one where the mother of the family lived and rumors had it that she was the one who looked over the family's money. She died a couple of years prior and probably no one knew where all the hiding places were. Once a brother who owned a nightclub was attacked by an Albanese in said nightclub. The attacker hit the brother in the head with a hammer. The brother went to the hospital and took away some permanent damage. Afterwards the attacker was caught and obviously put in jail. The guy managed to escape and proceeded to return to Albania. 2 weeks later he was found. He was murdered and there was no sign of a robbery. Naturally, a lot of people around here believe it was a hitman hired by the family even if there is no concrete proof. One of the brothers owns a small castle where he has his private Nazi museum. There are uniforms and such stuff, but the adult son of one of the brothers told me this. There was also the tombstone of Heinrich Himmler hidden in the castle. While I instantly believe he would buy this tombstone, me fairly sure Himmler never had one in the first place and that the brother bought a fake. I know it's hearsay, but this son of one of the brothers doesn't have a reason to lie about this. He likes his uncle and doesn't know me that well. In this castle the most important politicians of my region are regular guests and even multiple Thalian senators were there. Connections were made during celebrations there. There are many stories like these, but in summary, this is a strange family. Now to how they got all this money. There are all kinds of wacky theories which go from simple labor on a ship, where they were paid astronomical wages, to Nazi treasures that they found. The theory I personally believe, it was described to me by a guy who was pretty much the same age as them and knew the family back then, is that they smuggled drugs over the border of Peru. It is known that they were in South America. My boss even told me that he had once been in Peru. One of the brothers has a helicopter license and no one knows why. These brothers flew the drugs to the border and a couple of monks, who were there to spread the word of Jesus Christ, amen, brought the stuff over the border because they were not searched by the border police. There is more evidence that something of that sort has taken place, but it is hearsay, nonetheless. Not even the kids and wives of these brothers know what exactly went down. I even asked a friend whose father, a brother, has died, and he couldn't tell me either. They never talked about these years on a ship. I'm fairly sure we will never get to find out the truth, but this certainly is the most interesting local mystery I have ever heard. 5. The murderers of billionaires Barry and Honey Sherman were found dead in their mansion in Toronto by their realtor. They were found with their necks tied, fully clothed on their pool deck with no signs of a break-in. Well-known philanthropist, Barry was in the pharmaceutical industry, and they donated millions annually to multiple charities. The police originally believed it was a murder-suicide and didn't pursue other leads. The family launched a private investigation that found the evidence didn't support that theory and thus proved police incompetence. As the public became more interested, it was discovered there was a whole family dispute over inherited shares of the Apex company. The Shermans' nieces and nephews had launched lawsuits over their right to inherit shares, which they lost and most accepted. The Shermans' children hired private investigators via the inept Toronto police. It uncovered an unknown man leaving the property around the time of the murders. The case is fascinating and is the subject of multiple podcasts, a book, and a movie. 6. Houston, Texas Lovers Lane murders. During the summer of 1990, 22-year-old Cheryl Henry met 21-year-old Andy Atkinson through friends at Yucatan Liquor. Andy was home for the summer from Stephen F. Austin State University, and the two started dating. On August 22, 1990, the two, who had been dating now for around 2 weeks, had planned a double date with Cheryl's younger sister Shane. Each couple went their separate ways to continue the night. Shane said she kissed her sister goodnight and told her I love you around 11:30 p.m. It was what they always did. But when Shane woke up in the morning, Cheryl still wasn't home. And over at Andy's house, he also hadn't returned home. Both families contacted the police. A search was conducted for the couple and for the car they were in, Andy's white Honda Civic. In the early evening of August 23, Houston police located Andy's car after a guard who was doing a sweep of an industrial area called it in. It was parked in an isolated cul-de-sac on Enclave Road, an area often used as a lover's lane. When the police approached the car, it was clear something awful had happened. The windows were rolled down. The key was still in the ignition. The seats were relaxed, and a cassette was in the dash. On the floorboard of the passenger side was a woman's shoes and purse. But most chillingly, there were fresh signs of blood in the car. Just before midnight, the dogs led the police to an area roughly 200 yards from Andy's car. A golf club and 3 golf balls seemed to have been purposefully placed, pointing to pieces of a rotting cedar fence on the ground. Police looked under the pieces of fence and found the body of Cheryl. She was face down. Her clothes had been cut off and tossed near her remains. Her hands were bound behind her back with hemp rope. She had been assaulted and her throat was slashed with 3 gashes. Near her body was also a $20 bill. The search continued for Andy. The next morning, about 100 yards from Cheryl's body in the tree line, authorities discovered Andy's body. He was fully clothed with his back against a tree and his hands bound, like Cheryl's. And like Cheryl, his throat had also been slashed. But the slash was so deep, he was nearly decapitated. His watch and money were still on his person, ruling out the possibility of robbery as the primary motive. After 32 years, this mystery is still unsolved. 7. On February 25, 1957, the body of an unidentified boy was found in a box in an illegal dumping ground near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The boy was estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old, weighed about 30 pounds, and stood around 3 feet 3 inches. He was found wrapped in a blanket. His hair was recently cut, and his body was recently washed clean. There were small scars on his chin, groin, and left ankle, some of which proved he went through a small medical procedure. He was found with blunt force trauma to the head that was determined to be the cause of death, and there were no witnesses. The body was found by a young man who was walking through the abandoned lot. Strangely, the man waited an entire day before contacting the police, and even a second man had previously found the boy's body but had not contacted the police because he didn't want to get involved. With the wintry weather and delayed phone call, police weren't able to accurately estimate the time of the boy's death. In order to identify the boy, the body was kept in the morgue while visitors from 10 different states tried to look for identifiable marks to no avail. Police sent out 400,000 flyers of the boy to police stations, post offices, and courthouses all over the country. Even the American Medical Association sent out a description of the boy, but it led nowhere. The police compared the boy's footprints to hospitals in the area and even took fingerprints, but no record showed that the boy ever existed. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a forensic facial reconstruction of the victim and added him to their database. Unfortunately, the boy has never been identified and the case still remains open. 8. I always thought the mysterious green children from Woolpit was interesting. The legend of the green children of Woolpit concerns two children of unusual skin color who reportedly appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England, sometime in the 12th century, perhaps during the reign of King Stephen. The children, brother, and sister were of generally normal appearance except for the green color of their skin. They spoke in an unknown language and would eat only raw broad beans. Eventually, they learned to eat other food and lost their green color, but the boy was sickly and died soon after his sister was baptized. The girl adjusted to her new life, but she was considered to be rather loose and wanton in her conduct. 2. After she learned to speak English, the girl explained that she and her brother had come from a land where the sun never shone. According to one version of the story, she said that everything there was green. According to another, she said it was called St. Martin's Land. I am assuming the kids suffered from some sort of nutritional deficiency, but the story is interesting either way. 9. The 169th victim of the Oklahoma City bombing. They found an additional leg in the rubble. DNA tests showed it belonged to another victim who had already been buried, but with the wrong leg. The wrong leg had already been embalmed, so they could not get DNA at the time. So, who did this leg belong to? All other legs had been accounted for in other victims. They found no other body parts, and nobody else had been reported missing. It was only until 2015 they could get DNA from the leg, but it's still classified as John Doe. A few conspiracy theories had popped up, like maybe a second bomber that got caught in the blast, but it's still unknown. 10. Tim Molnar. Sends chills down my spine. Young kid from Florida, family-oriented and in college, all the good stuff. One day, in 1984, instead of taking his usual route to school, he decides to drive 50 miles in the opposite direction. He stopped to get gas and continued on. 4 months after he had disappeared, his folks received a letter from an auto impound company in Atlanta, Georgia, which said that he had left his car in a parking lot 6 days after he had initially vanished. They also discovered that he had pretty much emptied his bank account just before he left. On January 31, 1996, a show about unsolved mysteries aired, and Tim Molnar was on it. A guy named Stephen Cull who had seen it called and told them that he recognized Tim's clothes as the ones he had found on a body frozen in an ice block lot in Neosho, Wisconsin 10 years earlier. Through DNA testing, the body was confirmed to be Tim's. So, tell me, how does this 24-year-old kid who was incredibly close with his family end up 1,300 miles away from his home frozen in an ice block in Wisconsin? 11. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. He was driving home from a party and drove into a ditch. He called his parents and was on the phone with them as he was unsure of his exact location. He told his parents he was outside of a town, and they drove over to pick him up. They were on the phone with him as they were driving but were unable to locate him. He went silent after saying "oh shit" and was never to be seen again. 12. Asha Degree. Lived in my town, sad face. In 2000, she walked out of her home willingly at age 9 in the middle of the night on Valentine's Day during a massive storm. She was sighted multiple times walking down an extremely rural and desolate highway by herself in the pouring rain and then was never seen again. Her book bag was discovered miles away buried in a trash bag a year later. How was a 9-year-old convinced to leave her home alone in the middle of the night, in a storm, to walk down a deserted highway? How has there been no substantive leads at all since 2001? 13. Dardenne Family Murders, NSFL. A heavily pregnant mother and her son were found tied to the bed in their trailer home. They were beaten to death with a baseball bat the son was gifted for Christmas. The beating was so severe that the mom's corpse went into labor and the assailant then turned the bat onto the newborn, bashing it to death. Suspicion fell immediately on the father, but half a day later his body was found discarded in a field. His penis had been severed and he was shot in the head. His blood-stained car was found abandoned at a police station. Nothing was stolen, no assault on the mother, no forced entry in besides Tommy Lynn's cells, who has been ruled out, and no suspects. 14. The Taman Shad murder is so beyond bizarre, they think he was poisoned, but they don't know with what. They didn't know who the guy was, because he had no ID on him, and all his clothes had the tags ripped off. Then there's the brown suitcase, the fact that he was seen alive, I think, a full day earlier in the same spot they found his body, and the strange number code they don't understand. They generally think it has to do with some hardcore Cold War spy stuff, but who knows? The stone spheres of Costa Rica. Basically, huge spheres that no one has any clue who put them there or, perhaps more importantly, how. The Phoenix Lights. I'm not a big UFO nut, but this is just creepy. Thousands of people, including the governor, saw them. The governor, if memory serves, was a pilot, and when the government came out with their report, flares, after that some type of plane, the governor, once out of office of course. No real explanation. The Keddy murders. In 1981 Glenna Sharp, her son John, 15, his friend Dana, 17, were found brutally murdered by Glenna's eldest daughter Sheila. She found them, not murdered them. They had been staying in cabin 28 in the Keddy resort. Sheila had stayed with her friends in cabin 27 and found the bodies in the morning. Her sister, Tina, 12, was missing, and her remains were later found some 28 miles away after an anonymous tip was called in. The twist here is that in cabin 28 there were also 3 small children found alive and unharmed in their bedroom. Most people on Reddit have probably heard about it, but Oak Island, also known as the Money Pit, is a pretty big mystery. In 1795, Daniel McGuinness, of Nova Scotia, saw lights coming from the uninhabited Oak Island, named because, well, it's full of oak trees. He and some friends went to the island and found a large circular depression. So, they started digging and discovered a layer of flagstones a few feet below. On the pit walls there were visible markings from a pick. As they dug down they discovered layers of logs at about every 10 feet. They gave up at 30 feet. That's just the beginning. The Onslow Company picked up where McGuinness and his friends left off, reaching a depth of 90 feet, finding layers of logs every 10 feet and layers of charcoal, putty, and coconut fiber at 40, 50 and 60 feet. It should be noted that coconuts and thus their fibers aren't native to anywhere near Nova Scotia. Somewhere between 80 and 90 feet they found a coated rock that was translated saying something like 40 feet down, 2 million pounds lie buried. This is getting long, so I'll TLDR it, the pit floods. And not like we'll just pump out the water flood. The water comes in from 3 parts of the island with the tide. Many people and companies have tried to reach the bottom, but with no success. If interested, there is tons and tons of info on this. If people are interested in these, I've got like dozens more. This kind of stuff has been a fascination of mine since I was around 6 years old, so let me know if you want more. 15. For me personally, my grandmother was murdered in her home in 1996, I think. She was beaten so badly, her own sister didn't recognize her at first. Given where she was living, it was most likely some meth head, who will never be found, but it'd be interesting to know who did that to her. Edit, thank you for the kind words. It feels slightly uncomfortable getting influence off of a family tragedy. It happened a few years before I was born, but my dad always speaks fondly of her and shares little anecdotes. He's mostly at peace with it, but every year on her birthday he gets a bit sad, understandably so. We celebrated her birthday with some of her favorite cakes, and my dad will tell us a fun memory of her. Sometimes I like to speculate what could have happened, but out of respect of my father and other relatives, I've never really asked for information involving her death. 16. I want to know about Cicada 3301. Basically in 2012, an image was posted on 4chan saying we are trying to find intelligent individuals for our organization. If you have what it takes, the first clue is in this image. It was an incredibly elaborate puzzle, and solving the puzzle led to another puzzle. And another. And another. These puzzles ended up leading all around the world, in tons of different forms including the internet, telephone, original music, bootable Linux CDs, digital images, physical paper signs, and pages of unpublished cryptic books written in runes. 17. Did the Serbian farmer, Dord Martinovic, get injured from a bottled-up his or in a failed masturbation attempt or from an interrogation by two Albanian men? During May 1985, he was treated for injuries caused by the insertion of a bottled up his anus. Initially, he claimed that he was attacked by Albanians. While being interrogated, he stated that it was actually caused by him masturbating. The bizarre situation caused widespread controversy and contributed to worsening tensions between Kosovo's Serbs and Albanians. He eventually reverted back to his original story, that he was attacked. 18. Probably Terrence Woods Jr. He was a 26-year-old production assistant on scene in rural Idaho with his crew filming a documentary about an abandoned mine in late 2018. The project was slated for completion in mid-November, but he texted his father early morning on October 5, 2018, telling him that he would be heading home on the 10th of October, cutting his stay short by weeks. Later that day, when filming concluded for the day, he was seen speaking to one of the miners who used to operate the mine when Terrence said he was going to go into the foliage to relieve himself. The prod manager thought this was strange because apparently he had been acting odd all day, so the prod manager went to check on him. When he did, he noticed that Terrence's radio was on the ground and suddenly noticed Terrence break into a full-on sprint into the woods down small ledge. The manager tried to chase him but lost him in the woods shortly after trying. He returned to his crew and alerted the authorities, who launched a full-scale SAR mission that's turned up no clues. The authorities noted how odd it was that he was able to run in such thick foliage. He has never been seen nor heard from again. 19. Who murdered Jaspal and Geeta Singh in Syosset, New York, in 2007? Joining the list of unsolved Syosset crimes, Jaspal and Geeta Singh were killed in their Syosset home on January 23, 2007. Their sons, 12 and 13 years old at the time, had just returned home from school when they found their parents shot to death. Police did not reveal too much information on the details of the case, however, the consensus was that these murders were not a random act and that the couple was most likely targeted. Unsolved Mysteries just released a podcast about this where the surviving son Ankur discussed the case and urged for any tips to help solve his parents' murder. 20. The Cotman of Greenock. He's a peculiar, non-verbal man who crawls around on his stomach, is covered in dirt, and survives through eating rats. There were reported sightings in the 70s and 80s. There was no hard evidence of his existence until someone recorded him on their phone during 2007. There's lots of mixed opinions about him. Some swear that they encountered him. Others are certain that the whole thing is just a myth. But a fair amount of people thinks that there might have been an original one and the guy who was spotted more recently is an imposter, or it was a myth, but someone pretended to be him for a laugh. 21. Arnold Archambault, 20, Ruby Brugier, 19, and Tracy Dion, 17, were driving through the Yankton Sioux Indian Reservation in Lake Andes, South Dakota on December 12, 1992, when they lost control and crashed into a frozen ditch and flipped upside down. Tracy, Ruby's cousin, described seeing Ruby exit the vehicle out the passenger door, and when Tracy reached for the door, Ruby seemingly shut it behind her, leaving her cousin in the car. By the time help arrived, Ruby and Arnold were nowhere to be found. Police surveyed the surrounding area and around the ditch and the accident site but found nothing. Several months later, in March of 1993, Ruby's badly decomposed body was discovered 75 feet from the accident site. To make things even stranger, Arnold's body was found 15 feet from Ruby's, submerged in the water, but oddly, he had hardly decomposed at all. In fact, his clothes weren't even frozen to the ground. Despite police searching the surrounding area numerous times over the months, they'd not seen Ruby or Arnold's body. There were even traces of Ruby's hair found along the road, which couldn't have stayed there and gone unnoticed for 3 months. It's also been alleged by a witness who passed a polygraph test that she saw Arnold at a New Year's Eve party, a full 3 weeks after the accident. That's what makes it so mysterious. It raises so many questions. Was it natural causes? Foul play? If a person abducted Arnold and Ruby, why didn't the abductor find Tracy in the car, and what are the odds someone would come across the accident in the early morning in a relatively remote area and be able to kidnap Arnold and Ruby? How would law enforcement not notice a decomposing body for months some 75 feet away? If Arnold did survive the wreck, why was his body found back at the ditch in a different state of decomposition? It's so bizarre. 22. I have a personal story about my ex-dentist for all people. My sister recently went in and was chatting with the gossipy nurse. The nurse told her about how the old dentist started acting really strangely and texting during meetings as if he was completely uninterested anymore. This was very out of character for him, as he had been a dentist for 20 years and was always really invested. She also mentioned that she'd often have to go searching for him when it was time for him to visit with a patient, and that she would usually find him in the basement of the clinic. One day he left suddenly with a briefcase and told them he wouldn't be coming back. This was in the middle of the day during work hours, so they had to scramble to find a replacement for him to help for the rest of the day. A few months after he had left, she saw him as a patient at a different clinic she was filling in for, and when he saw her he was super friendly and acted like nothing had happened. She felt strange about the whole situation, but she did her job like she would with any other patient. At the end of the appointment, she went in for a handshake, but he pushed her hand away and went in for a hug. As he was hugging her, he asked, "Can you take me back into the basement?" She says they've torn that basement apart and can't find whatever he was trying to get back to down there. After all, what is there in my dentist office basement? 23. Whatever happened to the bloody Benders of Labette County, Kansas? They were a family in the frontier days of Kansas that are suspected of being serial killers. After a few bodies showed up of people that had all been killed in the same fashion, the Benders were suspected, but nothing came of it until a few important people that stayed at their inn were never seen again. The Benders disappeared, and no knowledge of where they ended up or what, if anything, happened to them. 24. The WOW signal. Astronomers have speculated for years that, if intelligent alien life were real, they would have similar or better understandings of physical sciences as we do. One thing that is universal in chemistry and physical sciences is frequencies emitted by certain atomic elements. Therefore, intelligent alien life would most likely have an understanding of these frequencies as we do. So, if intelligent life wanted to communicate in a way which was universal between planets, i.e., not a special language or numeric system, then emitting a signal at a certain frequency would be an excellent way of doing that. As hydrogen is the building block of all other elements due to its simplicity and integral nature, astronomers speculate that, if intelligent life wanted to communicate through frequencies, they would do so in the hydrogen frequency. In the 70s, radio telescopes in the US were pointed up towards the sky collecting any radio data that came in. Most of the data collected is seemingly nothing, just random radio noise. However, in the early morning of August 15, 1977, one of these radio telescope centers began to get a ton of data. And it was all at or near the frequency of hydrogen. And the signal was strong and fairly consistent, meaning that it would be incredibly unlikely it was random radio noise or passing radiation. Technicians monitoring the data were dumbfounded by the signal and had no explanation for why it was coming or how it was so consistent. So, they just wrote "wow" on the datasheet. We still don't know how such a powerful signal could have even penetrated our atmosphere and remained consistently transmitted for as long as it did. Some people believe it could have been military testing nearby, but, again, it would be incredibly unlikely such a consistent message could be transmitted through simple interference. Plus, no military testing was reported in the surrounding area. The same or similar data has not been reported since, leading many to believe that the signal could have been an SOS signal from a dying planet, or just a passing coincidence that we may never see again. 25. Maybe not the strangest of mysteries, but my grandmother was from an early age friend with a girl named Violet Vogelsang. Violet was adopted by the German merchant Heinrich Vogelsang, who had found her in a kraal in Namibia in 1900. She was the only white girl, about 4 years old, in a fully black community. She could not remember how she got into the kraal, nor how long she had been there, obviously for a while, and only from her name and accent it was obvious that she was of British descent. She never found out how she had ended up in the kraal, or who her parents were. There were some theories around her possible ancestry, but when she confronted a lady whom she suspected, the lady denied being her mother. I can't remember too many details, but I will try to gather some additional information and update this comment. 26. Serial killer Dean Corll has 28 victims attributed to him, but police stopped looking for additional victims because they didn't want the publicity/scrutiny of having the nation's most prolific serial killer. Corll's family owned a candy factory and Corll was frequently seen digging around the property and likely buried unknown victims in areas that were later paved over. It has also been alleged, by his accomplices, that Corll was a part of a nationwide underage trafficking ring and that he procured young boys for wealthy clients. Police had absolutely no idea that Corll was involved in any crimes. He was killed by his teenage accomplice after they had a falling out and Corll threatened to kill him. It's a mystery how many victims he truly had because the police wrote them off as teenage runaways. It's also a mystery about the extent of the national trafficking ring because police didn't pursue those leads either. It makes you wonder how many prolific serial killers have gone unnoticed because they chose to prey on the most vulnerable and easily written off victims. 27. In January of 2000 in Asheville, North Carolina, Zeb Quinn went missing and has never been found. Here is the whole story, but it never made any sense to me. See, I grew up with Zeb and have known him since elementary school. He was a kind kid, never got into fights, never saw him at parties in high school, in fact, never saw anything really to hate him for. Just the idea that someone could kill him is so bizarre to me. And all this time later we only have a few clues to go off of. So yes, this one is a bit personal for me, but that's what makes it so strange. 28. What happened to the Waco door? So, the Waco siege has many small mysteries that don't make sense. But there is one that sits primely above them all because this one relates to how it all went south. Everything that happened up to February 28 didn't matter nearly as much as this brief object. February 28, FBI and ATF agents drove up to the Davidian compound, at which point, the Davidians opened the door, allegedly to talk to the agents in hopes of a quick and peaceful solution. However, the moment the door opened, both sides claimed to come under fire. The agents claimed to hear gunfire and rounds soaring overhead, while on camera footage of that day, bullet impacts can be seen hitting the front door of the compound, and surviving Davidians claim to instantly get showered in metal fragments and wood chips from the composite metal wood door. That door is a key piece in rebuilding the crime scene to establish what happened and find out who fired first. Following the fire on April 29, 1993, the site came under investigation. prime artifacts being keys to the investigation, chief among them being the front door. Witnesses including federal agents recall seeing the door unbolted from its place and loaded onto a U-Haul trailer towed by a black SUV just like the ones the ATF and FBI were driving, and then the door never arrived to either department. To this day, that whole door has never been seen again. And no one has ever proven with any certainty which side fired the first shots. 29. The Gilgo Beach murders in 2010, 4 bodies were found, wrapped in burlap, and discarded in a desolate area near Gilgo Beach, Suffolk County, New York. All the victims were women, and all had been escorts on Craigslist. This was only the first of several grisly discoveries. Within months, the remains of as many as 16 victims had been found, from Gilgo Beach stretching out east to the Pine Barrens of Manorville. And yet for over a decade, the police have announced not a single suspect or person of interest. Months passed, then years, with no comment from the department about the case. 30. Theo Hayes is a little baffling. Backpacker in Australia in 2019 left a bar around midnight, never to be seen again. They followed his phone data to some beach tracks, generally only known by locals and very dark. Then it appears he ran a little way in the opposite direction. They found his hat somewhere too, I think. His phone has never been switched back on, no trace has ever been found, and there has never been any sight of him again. 31. Like 15 years ago I had these 2 stuffed animals that were identical, so there was an extra or whatever, I'm not sure. One day I swear I dropped one of them behind the toy chest at the foot of my bed and I never found it. I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, so the memory is hazy, but I do remember dropping it and losing it. A few years later we were moving to another state, and I realized that my chance to search for the stuffed animal was when we were packing up my room, because obviously all my stuff being packed up would mean I would find it. No such luck. To this day, I have another one, so I'm glad there was an extra, but I have been annoyed and puzzled by this for years. Where did it go? My parents said I didn't lose it in a park or anything, and I did have it with me in my room the last time I had it, and I never went anywhere without it. We've moved one more time since and it is still missing. R.I.P. Buddy number 1. 32. Okay, this will sound strange, but where I lived for many years growing up in Petaluma, California, there was a place everyone would avoid. It was called Haystack Landing. It had tons of strange things and death there from since the early 1900s. Then the house became abandoned in about the 60s. One day I was in a boat and it flipped over in the river, but something unknown, I swam to shore and yelled across the river for help to a house that I did not recognize from the back at a woman in the window, and it was Haystack Landing. It was a river house. Kids tried to do graffiti on the home and ran screaming, so the police finally put a fence around the property and locked it. Later the house caught fire and burned to the ground. When the fire department got there the gate was still locked and nothing, but the house was burnt, no dried grass or anything around it. There was a movie crew that was doing a documentary on it, before it burnt in the 80s, but they stopped production and never went back and never said anything on why they stopped. I looked online and there were articles on it, now those have been taken down, so it's hard to find anything about it anymore. 33. The disappearance of Antoinette Cayadito. Poor girl was kidnapped in front of her sis, in the middle of the night because her mother was too wasted to care. Snatched right out of the front door. The call she made from Albuquerque is chilling. And also, the fact that years later, someone missed her calls for help in a restaurant. If they had noticed only a few seconds earlier, she would have been freed. 34. Justin Busca of Tamworth, New Hampshire, age 27 when he disappeared, has been missing from Laguna de Ayarza, Guatemala since January 6, 2018. He's believed to have been murdered and has since been declared dead by the U.S. State Department. Allegedly search groups were threatened by locals and the U.S. government pulled out and has done nothing to find him or pursue justice. We miss you, Justin, you were a kind soul. You are not forgotten. 35. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froome. Two girls from the Netherlands were traveling and exploring the Central American country of Panama. On April 1st, the 21-year-old and 22-year-old went for a walk through the scenic forests around the Baru volcano in Boquete. Both were never seen again. 10 weeks later, when a local woman who found Froome's blue backpack turned it in to authorities. The bag contained her camera as well as 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, Froome's passport, a water bottle, 2 bras, and both women's phones. The phone showed that just hours after the beginning of their hike, someone dialed 112 and then 911. The calls did not connect due to a lack of signal. Subsequent analysis revealed that on April 4th, Froome's phone battery became exhausted, but between April 5th and April 11th, Kramer's iPhone was turned on multiple times, but whoever turned it on didn't enter the PIN code correctly. 2 months after the backpack was found, a pelvic bone and foot, still inside a boot, were discovered in the same area. Full remains were found soon afterward and were assumed to be the 2 missing women. Froome's bones appeared as if they had decomposed naturally, but Kramer's bones were mysteriously stark white as if they had been bleached, raising questions about whether someone had been involved in their deaths. The part of this case that has always stuck with me were the photos they found on the camera. Really creepy stuff. I recommend giving them a look. 36. For me, it will always be my cousin's murder. Finished basic training with the Navy. In the gap before he was shipped off, he went to a party off base with some friends and his girlfriend. Everyone was inside the house and accounted for. He went to the front porch for a cigarette. People heard a pop and went outside. He had been shot once in the head, cigarette still burning, nobody in sight of the house, wallet still on him. The military kept his body for quite a while before we could have the funeral, but as far as I'm aware no leads have ever been presented. 37. In a remote village in Georgia in Russia, a 6.5 feet tall wild woman was caught from the mountains in the 1850s. She had red hair all over her body and was very muscular. She was named Zana, and she spent several years in a cage. Eventually, she was let out. She roamed the village, but always came back. She was trained in simple chores and never wore clothes. Her strength was legendary, and she did not seem to be affected by the frigid winter air. She enjoyed grapes and also had a weakness for wines, often drinking so heavily she would sleep for hours. This is likely how she became the mother of many children to different fathers. Her first 2 children died when she tried to wash them in the freezing river. The villagers then started to take her children away from her and raise them on their own. She died in 1890. When her grandchildren were researched by a professor, one of her grandsons had jaws so powerful he could lift a chair with a man sitting in it. Their DNA test shockingly showed that Zana's ethnic background was 100% sub-Saharan African. 38. This thing happened in Delhi, India, and there was a Netflix documentary about it. There was a family of 11 people living in a house, basically 2 brothers and their family living together with their grandmother. In 2019 all of them were found hanging from the ceiling, even the children but not the grandmother. She was found dead by the bedside. Apparently, the head of the household started having visions of his dead father claiming that you have to hang your family on this particular day, and I will come and save you from the dead. There were 11 diaries about it kept for 11 years. Even more sad part is that their eldest daughter just had an engagement a few days prior. 39. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, and his brother Charles Wesley, got into a fight about whether people who weren't ordained, lay preachers, were allowed to preach. The old Church of England rule said that if you were preaching, you had to be ordained. Since John Wesley's new movement was more populist and catered toward poor people, who couldn't afford to get ordained, John allowed people who weren't ordained to preach at early Methodist services. One day, a lay preacher named William Seward was killed by a group of men claiming to be against the fact that William wasn't ordained. It kind of seems like Charles paid the men to kill William. Not only is it weird for a bunch of random men to care about whether William was ordained, but the next day, Charles writes in his journal, I was shocked with the news of Mr. Seward's death, but he is taken from the evil. I've done a shit ton of research, but I can't find anything else that would hint that it's Charles. The only thing that I could find was this movie called Wesley, 2009, which portrays Charles organizing William's death. 40. A man in Kerry, Ireland, was well respected in his town. He had been renting a field for cows to graze for many years and the owner put it up for sale. Everyone thought that he would buy it, but someone who wasn't local also wanted it. The non-local had more money than the local man and was going to be sold the field. Then one night the non-local was killed and everyone thought it was the local man, but they never solved who murdered him and it's still not solved. 41. Jacqueline Priestman is a British woman from Manchester who became notable for the way electronics behaved around her. Her ordeal started in 1980 after her husband died following an argument they had. She cursed him saying, "I hope you break your neck." That's exactly how he died. Sometime later light bulbs in her house started exploding when she was around. Her vacuum cleaner kept burning out. Other electrical appliances went haywire around her, and some appliance stores even banned her. When a visiting professor examined her, he found her to suffer from an extreme buildup of static electricity, 10 times the normal. He recommended a special diet and walking around the house holding onions to discharge electricity. Her symptoms slowly diminished, however, when her daughter was born in 1985, she too started exhibiting symptoms of high voltage syndrome. The exact reason behind her strange symptoms still remains unsolved. 42. The Elisa Lam case has always creeped me out and left me puzzled. Her death was officially ruled out as an accidental drowning, but I have trouble believing she climbed into that water tank. The surveillance video of her on the elevator is so creepy to me. Her behavior was very bizarre. I thought it was strange that the elevator didn't respond to any of the buttons she pressed, almost like they were disabled. The door just stayed open. When she was making those strange hand gestures, her hands and fingers bent in such a weird way. It almost looks like her fingers are bending backwards. I also thought it was strange that the media/investigators kept bringing up her depression/bipolar disorder and blaming her behavior/using that as a contributing factor to her behavior and ultimately hopping into the water tank. She had no prior history of psychosis, and toxicology reports did find traces of her medications in her system. I don't have bipolar spectrum disorder, but my brother does. He would often experience manic episodes if he skipped his medications for a few days at a time, but he never experienced full-blown psychosis after skipping a day or two of his medication. All the articles on Elisa Lam suggest she was experiencing full-blown psychosis from this. Considering all her medications were still in her system with the toxicology report, I highly doubt this. Oh, and her cell phone was never found. Definitely reeks of foul play. 43. The case of Joanna Lopez. There are so many details that are just missing, and whatever leads were taken return little to no results. Who was Joanna? Why did she go missing? Why did a TV station in the late 80s and early 90s decide to broadcast the fact that she was missing after a sign-off, of all places, let alone without any identifying facts outside of a name, a phone number, and a low-quality picture? This was several years before the Amber Alert system became a thing, too. Had it been around back then, this mystery would be solved pretty easily, I'd imagine. But so many people think that Joanna Lopez's disappearance was some kind of a hoax on the TV station's part. There are so many theories, and at the same time, I fear this will remain an unsolved mystery. 44. Disappearance of Maura Murray. This girl was seen on that snowy mountain road, a car crashed, police officers were called and within 10 minutes she had vanished. No tracks, dogs lost the scent, and she hasn't been seen or heard from in 18 years. Michaela Bali vanishing in small Canadian town. The town cameras tracked her entire day. She had turned a corner where there were no cameras and was never seen again. These vanishing people cases are always so creepy to me. 45. In March 1998, Amy Bradley, her parents and her brother went on a cruise for vacation. One night she and her brother went to the nightclub and stayed there for the majority of the night. She even danced with one of the musicians who performed that night. Later her brother returned to their shared cabin, and she followed him. They even talked a bit. In the morning the father woke up and went to check on Amy and her brother, or he found her laying outside of the cabin, on the balcony, but he couldn't see her entire body, he only saw her legs. He left and then came back after some time, but she was nowhere to be seen, so the family started searching for her, before it was even told to anybody on the cruise, apart from the staff. The man with whom she danced with went to her brother and told him, "I'm sorry for what happened to your sister." They searched for her on the cruise, in the waters and in the city where they were, but she basically disappeared from everywhere. Even the FBI was involved in the search. Some years later a picture of what seemed like her, she was a bit older but the tattoos were the same, was found on a site for escorts, and she was allegedly seen once by some guys, to which she asked for help, and another time, in a bathroom she met a woman and told her, "My name is Amy, I need help," but was taken away by some men.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.